Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your break or your breakouts as we get ready to invite some new guests, taking one collective breath together as a community, just breathing in and breathing out. Just connect us. So our next conversation is titled Healing Trauma, Supporting Gun Violence Survivors Through Mindfulness. We'd like to invite John Kabat-Zinn, is the founder of MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and known for his work bringing mindfulness into the mainstream of medicine and society. He is also an elder and dear friend of the conference. Dr. Fadel Zeidan is the executive director at the UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness and a neuroscientist studying how mindfulness promotes well-being. Introducing David Simas is the CEO of the Obama Foundation. And finally, Brenda Mitchell, whose son Kenneth was murdered 1 week after his brother Kevin left to serve in his third tour of duty in Iraq, Kuwait, and lastly, Afghanistan. A single parent, Kenneth left behind a son who never got to meet his father. Brenda is a senior fellow with Everytown Survivor Network, survivor membership lead, interfaith outreach leader for Moms Demand Action in South Suburban Chicago, and a member of the advocacy organization Purpose Over Pain. We are so grateful to have you all with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, thank you. And John, Fadel, Brenda, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today for this discussion about supporting gun violence survivors through mindfulness. Before we open up the discussion, given the topic for our session today, I'd like for everyone to just take a moment to reflect on the individuals who just over the past week in the United States and throughout the world who have suffered and lost their lives through gun violence in Boulder, in Atlanta. And just yesterday in the United States, on March 26th, there were 29 people who died in gun violence, which is more than died in the entire last year in the United Kingdom. And this isn't just a recent occurrence, it's something that has gripped the United States for decades. In 2020, there were 15,000 individuals who were killed by gun violence. There were 20,000 people who committed suicide by a gun. Year after year after year, the statistics increase. But underneath the statistics is the reality of life that goes on for the families, for the loved ones, for entire communities like mine and Brenda's here on the south side of Chicago, where it isn't something that just happens once in a while, but it becomes part of everyday living. And so if we could just take one moment to reflect on the lives lost and the lives that have been harmed as a result of gun violence in the United States. Thank you. Brenda, I had the wonderful opportunity a few weeks ago on a pre-call with our colleagues here to get to hear your story and to spend a little bit of time with you. And I'd like to begin this discussion by turning it over to you so that you can speak to us and to everyone watching today and those who will watch in the future about your experience and about your son, Kenneth. Brenda.
Thank you very much. My son, Kenneth, who was pretty much, my firstborn son in the center of our family, had just taken his brother like a week prior to his death to the airport to realize his third tour of duty in harm's way. He had been to Afghanistan and he had also gone to Iraqi for Iraqi freedom. And this was his third tour of duty over there. And a week later, I had to call Kevin and let Kevin know he had to come home, that I lost his brother in a free country. And it was very difficult to have to tell him that, when he's fighting for someone else's freedom, and to only be brought back a week later to bury his brother in a free country. And those of us that know that freedom is not free. Sometimes it costs. And Kenneth had three sons, one of which never got to meet his father. And he often wonders, how doesn't everybody know his father but him? And the other two boys wanting what they had, because Kenneth was their primary parent. He was a single father raising his two boys. And they wanted what every other child had, a father that was able to say that a boy, pat him on the back for the touchdown or the tackle on the football field. And it became very difficult for us. And the impact immediately was not as damning, but like 12 years into this, all of us were struck with the impact of PTSD, trauma, and realizing that, I was so fragile that I could not even, deal with the situations of the boys, because I could not change things for them. And the more that I could not change, the more that it impacted me. I had a position that was very stressful in the healthcare arena. And the boys were just, I want my dad. I want him to see me make this touchdown. I want to go across that goal. I want the pat on the back like the other boys have. And I couldn't produce that for them, nor could I reproduce it for them. And so, one of the emergency room trauma physicians says that a lot of times it does not affect you at impact, that it could be years later before you realize that. And in that 12th year, I had almost died 3 times from the impact of trauma, aggression to my physical being, as well as my emotional being. And I realized that I was fragile and I needed to take steps towards self care, which has kind of led me on this journey of mindfulness and trauma informed resources to heal the brokenhearted. Because I often say we walk around like the walking wounded, because we know that we have a sore that will never heal, but we have to be able to navigate through life under different circumstances. Because one thing that we realize is that there is no new norm.
Brenda, even though I heard that you said that a couple of weeks ago, again, I just want to thank you for your openness, your willingness, and your ability to convey to everyone what I think Fadel will now describe as he thinks about the research, and as the father of 2 children.
Yes.
It is the type of pain that you don't want to imagine or live through. So a deep and real sense of gratitude and affection and awe for you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Fadel,
Thank you.
you, Fadel, have been involved in studying mindfulness and how to deal with individuals in pain. You've conducted numerous amounts of research, both in North Carolina and now at the University of California at San Diego. You're presently engaged in some research involving survivors of gun violence. If you could lay out for us the underlying objective of the research, and to the extent that you can, begin to describe some of the findings, albeit preliminary for some of them that you have. So Fadel.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. And thank you, Brenda, for sharing your testimony. I've been watching some of your videos on Congress and the wonderful testimonials and stories and insights that you have brought, and your advocacy. And now you're advocating in a different way by allowing yourself to enter this space of mindfulness, and then allowing groups like my team and our center's team to see what happens. So thank you for a deep gratitude for that, Brenda. It's really empowering on our end as scientists to see that level of involvement when you don't need to be involved. So thank you so much for sharing. We were presented with this idea of a program to teach survivors of gun violence mindfulness training through mindfulness-based stress reduction, trauma-informed mindfulness-based stress reduction. We had 44 survivors of gun violence that entered this trial. And the idea was pretty grandiose, and we jumped on it without even thinking about it. The idea is to teach survivors of gun violence mindfulness, and using a platform that is nurturing and thoughtful to lead them to a path of what we call certification, to then be trainers themselves, trauma-informed mindfulness certified trainers to other victims of gun violence. And so this level of work is seminal in my eyes. Having been doing this research for 22 years, I never thought of anything that could be so powerful, where the ripple effect of what we have in this 44 person group experiment project would give rise to a tsunami of trauma healing through first-person testimonials combined with evidence-based scientific rigor. So in this project, we measured using a whole host of validated psychometrics, biological, and neuroinflammatory assays before 8-week MBSR, after 4-week MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is trauma-informed, here at the UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness, and then after 8 weeks. And so we measured psychological outcomes. Our survivors also performed some pretty invasive things to provide some biological data, and deep gratitude for that too. It was really incredible. And we have data that we literally analyzed last night from 22 of the survivors. So we already have 50% completion, which is pretty great. And so the data are very preliminary, and we're waiting for the second half, which we're very excited about. But again, I've been doing this for quite some time. I've never seen movement like this. And as a health psychologist and a neuroscientist, in my eyes, there is no worse trauma to the human condition. I haven't witnessed anything that through the literature, there's nothing that can even come close to the trauma of losing someone through a gun, being ripped away in that way. So from all what I'm going to show you or present to you are all statistically significant for whatever that means. And this is the change from before mindfulness-based stress reduction to afterwards. And please just keep in your mind how amazing it is for our survivors to share this, and the metrics here that moved. We saw a 22% reduction in stress, a 54% reduction in post-traumatic stress disorder symptomologies. We saw a 60% reduction in depression, a 23% reduction in grief, 38% drop in trauma, self-reported trauma, 10% increase in forgiveness. Anxiety, trait level anxiety went down 24%. And our participants said they slept a lot better. They were able to close their eyes and not see their kids or their lost ones. And sleep disturbance improved by 27%. And they also felt more socially connected. We saw a 10% increase in social connectedness, a 27% decrease in self-judgment, and a 54% increase in satisfaction with life. And so these metrics you can't see with any other therapy. There is no drug for this. And in reality, what's happening here is not some other facilitator or therapist eliciting this movement or these improvements in well-being. Our survivors taught themselves in ways to be more aware of what was arising in their mind and how to mindfully let go and start over in a moment-to-moment basis. And to that extent, we did see a 40% decrease in mindfulness. And we're in the game of also appreciating how these things are manifested. And what we saw, we ran some regression models and found basically that higher mindfulness, dispositional mindfulness from MBSR was predictive of those reductions in trauma, stress, improvements in sleep disturbance, grief, depression, and life satisfaction. It's as if the mindful enhancement was eliciting this change. And there is no more powerful change than having the individual, his or herself, facilitate it, go through it, not distract themselves. So we have to continue this work. Well, this is the first 8-week program. We have a lot more training that our gun violence survivors have stated they want to continue to be on the path on. And we have to provide them a nurturing home to allow them to have the space to keep going through this at their own pace. And if there's anything in this country that has been brought to our consciousness is the fact that we don't have a shortage of gun violence victims. And this trauma-informed work is going to continue and continue and continue to blossom to hopefully we can manifest some policy changes as well. So we're dedicated to this program here at UCSD. We're looking for partners to help with the mission, to support the effort. We've even developed a website called tim.ucsd.edu, TIM for Trauma Informed Mindfulness, .ucsd.edu. We look forward to partnering with people so that we can continue this work. Thank you. I'm happy to continue this conversation. There's a lot more to go through here. We haven't even touched the biological data. So.
That's extraordinary. Fadel, it's extraordinary. And what a promising beginning of a path of essentially engaging with survivors themselves to go into the communities that they are a part of. And after they engage with their own trauma, to begin to heal others who are going through the same thing in the communities from a position of complete and understanding and trust. And so, Fadel, thank you. John Kabat-Zinn, as the founder of MBSR many, many, many years ago, I'd just love to hear your reaction both to Brenda's powerful testimony, but also to what Fadel just described, and just to hear how you are processing this and thinking about it, John.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Brenda and Fadel and everybody who's been involved in this project. It's staggering. I mean, I'm sure I speak for everybody on this call and anybody who's ever heard Brenda speak about her circumstances and what happened in her life, and anybody can relate to it. I mean, you know, we're all incredibly vulnerable, and yet we live our lives as if we're invulnerable and it only happens to other people. And it's a certain kind of ignorance or blindness to the human condition and our vulnerability. And then when something like this does happen to you, the magnitude of it is really unimaginable. So any approach to this has to really be unbelievably sensitive to what trauma really means, so that trauma doesn't just become another slogan to pass over, something that's inconceivably painful, and where the roots of this pain really reside in some elements of society that are seriously off, horrific, not in concert with what we profess to be our values as a society, as a democratic society. And we're boiling in the pot of this right now in our country, and we have been for a very long time. So in a sense, this conversation and this research and everything else is part of a much larger circumstance in which we find ourselves asking deep questions about how can we live life with integrity on an individual level, on a neighborhood level, on a sort of city civic level, and on a national level, and on the planetary level, in ways that optimize, minimize harm, and optimize some kind of, we use the word peace, but well-being, a confidence that, we can live our way into old age, say, without having the kinds of tensions in this world throw us into warfare in our own streets, never mind in the streets of other cities halfway around the world, where we have no idea what the cultures are, but we're there fighting for democracy and for liberation that we may not have here at home in some very real ways that, and it's not some kind of philosophy or ideology. I mean, when it hits home, when you lost the loss of a child in midlife, in full life, and the loss of the way you were describing Kenneth's sons wanting the pat on the back after the touchdown. I mean, that is just absolutely heartbreaking. And how we heal this is the actuality of our circumstances is really the subject of this whole conversation. Of course, it has to be addressed at a national level because the problem is really at a far larger than a national level. So just to be clear, we need healing on every level on which that word has any meaning, from the planetary to the individual person. And today we're really talking about the individual person and its relationship to the larger society, because what you're doing, Fadel, and your colleagues at the University of California, San Diego, is a hugely important work as a step towards that healing, by making it clear what the power of taking some degree of responsibility for putting out the welcome mat to even the most horrific and stressful aspects of life, and demonstrating that not only can we heal ourselves, which is in some sense the primary foundation of MBSR, but that this is not just a training program for people who have been experienced or victims of gun violence. These are people who have said yes to wanting to actually train other people in those circumstances in their own neighborhoods, people that look like them, people who understand their circumstances from the ground up, so that they can then go off and contribute to healing in this kind of a way. So that's really what MBSR was always about from the beginning. But what healing means, if we're going to talk about what we really mean by healing, my working definition of it is not fixing or making it go away or pretending that nothing ever happened, whether it's cancer, whether it's heart disease, whether it's chronic pain, or whether it's, any kind of aging associated with disease, but also with these kinds of social diseases that are actually killing us. And my working definition, not pretend it's not there, but to actually heal it, not cure it. And we make a big distinction in MBSR between healing and curing. Curing really is like restore it to the way it was before. And that's not possible in these kinds of circumstances. You can't pull back the bullet. healing in our working definition of it is a coming to terms with the actuality of things as they are. And that coming to terms means looking the darkness right in the face, looking the horror right in the face, and understanding that we all have a deep inner spaciousness and capacity of heart to do just that, embrace the horror, and find that we're so much larger than that, and that we can actually find some kind of solace within that loss that can never be, in some sense, reclaimed, but at the same time be of use in the world in ways that it will not destroy us and it will be of benefit to others. So this is a kind of really doubly or triply remarkable study, because you're actually finding that people who were themselves experiencing gun violence want to do this kind of work and then contribute in the society. And then just to say, becoming an MBSR teacher or any kind of mindfulness-based teacher is non-trivial. It's one of the hardest karmic assignments, let's put it that way, to take on, because it means that you're willing to actually recognize all the ways in which we're completely inadequate. When we talk about wisdom, well, who's that? You know, we know it ain't me, when we're really honest with each other. When you practice mindfulness, the first thing you realize when you watch your own mind is how mindless we all are, or at least I am, because the mind is all over the place and it's so caught up in its own narratives and emotional turbulence, and a lot of it totally justified when we're talking about trauma, and yet it's eroding of our own well-being when we most need to actually zero in what's deepest and best in ourselves. So a deep kind of bow to this whole enterprise that Shelley Tagilsky, to name her, sort of inspired this whole community to do, much of which came after the Parkland shooting, where a whole bunch of people, and Brenda, I believe you were part of the retreat that went on at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, you know, which was a fantastically nested, protected environment for this kind of meeting of minds and hearts on the part of people who were all affected by gun violence in their families. And to discover that mindfulness, in some sense, was like a gigantic hug, that the community could find its own way to be in relationship with each other and see the light as well as the darkness. And then affirm, as I understand it, I wasn't there, that there was some kind of worthy next step to take to address other people who might benefit from this kind of approach if only they knew about it. And so this is, in some sense, as Fadel was indicating, in some sense, the beginning of an initiative that really transcends anything that's come before, and where the preliminary data that you have that supports that those 44 people, or however many it went, who went through this particular phase of it, or the 22 that whose data you analyzed, they've been transformed in ways that you usually don't see in people who haven't suffered from that kind of trauma, at least in the short term. You have to do long-term follow-up and so forth, but it's incredibly promising and also uplifting in the sense that this may be a way that we can contribute to healing not only ourselves, but our communities, and ultimately our country, and ultimately some aspect of the world that then is even more generalizable, because there are so many other things that we are suffering from in this country that have to do with mindlessness, that have to do with greed, that have to do with delusion, that have to do with hatred, that is fulminating in this country to an enormous degree. And if mindfulness can address this kind of thing in a way that has significance, then it's actually a light in the darkness that suggests that it can be more broadly applicable as well. And so a deep bow to of course, Wisdom 2.0, which has been saying this for a long time and advocating this for many years now, and bringing all sorts of players together from different universes and recognizing that mindfulness or pure awareness is a human capacity that may be the final common pathway of what makes us human, and that can address all sorts of very, very divisive issues, because at one, we are all human and our hearts all beat in our chests and bleed, metaphorically and literally. And so I just am very, very moved to see things happening in this direction, and very optimistic given what has happened so far, that the team at UCSD and Brenda and your entire community and what Shelley is cooking up on a larger level, that all of these things move in a direction of a profound healing that is the embodiment of wisdom, that is in some sense the embodiment of an illumination of what it really, really, really means to be a human being, even in the face of some of the darkness that unfortunately we're suffering from far too much, far more than we really would want to.
Joan, so grateful to hear that reflection on the path and where we are, and also a wonderful segue to go back to Brenda, where Brenda, when we spoke last week, you had this beautiful phrase where you were talking about your brother and your mother and what you had seen and what you had experienced, and how after the death of Kenneth, there had been an inclination to advocacy. But at some point, which led you to Barry, you described, Brenda, a transition from chaos to calmness that then anchors you in a way that, and we'll hear from Fadel a little bit more in a moment as to the hypothesis around that transition from chaos to calmness. But if you could talk about the experience that you had in MBSR, in mindfulness, in what you saw and how you felt you change.
Yes. You know, I was in a position where it was either, sink or swim. And I saw myself as being fragile. I saw myself as being broken. And I was in a doctor's office, and she was recommending that I did not go back to work. And I actually had on a new outfit to go to a new job. And I had to realize that I was broken and I was fragile. And I stopped in that moment to realize that I no longer saw myself. I couldn't see me anymore. And everybody talked about a new norm, but I didn't know how to get there. And I was still, kind of struggling and trying to find my way, but I left and I stopped. I realized there were a lot of advocates out there. And there were a lot of photo opportunities for us, which was great because it gave voice to our pain. And we realized that our purpose was greater than our pain. But you still are navigating through chaos. I didn't see me. Um, and I had to find a place where I could see myself again. It's kind of like Dr. Cabot was saying about being locked or caught up in your own mindlessness. I could not find mindfulness because I couldn't see me anymore. And I did meet Shelley, and I tell you, and Sharon, but Shelley was instrumental in moving me from point A to point B at Barry. And I had the opportunity to learn how to be present in the moment with myself. And that sometimes that, and this was probably one of the most hugest things for me, was to pause. And in the mindfulness training in the MBSR, I learned to magnify that pause and give it more meaning. And I had to, I'm comfortable in point A, but I didn't want to necessarily navigate to point B because point B was going to give me more energy, and I had to exert more to get to point B. But at point A was fine. But I realized that I was limiting myself, and I did move to point B, and I brought other people along with me for the training because it's significant. It's significant when you walk in a room of survivors and we're validated from the point of walking in the room. There's no explanation that needs to be made. Um, we all understand when we look at each other, we already know what space we're in. If we're in a happy space or if we're in a chaotic space, if we're fresh, as we call new moms that have just lost their children, we can identify them through every moment of their process. And I think that's why mindfulness and meditation is so huge for survivors to be able to impact it with other survivors, because we recognize that in ourselves, our own limitations. And mindfulness in the retreat taught me so much about embracing my emotions and navigating through um, the chaos and identifying the chaos, but having my own space that centers me. And when I move from my center, I'm able to identify that I'm outside of that center and to pause, take a vacation with myself, and get back into that center where the work is actually being done. So I hope I answered that for you. And I mean, and it's like, I'm an ordained minister, so this is not necessarily, the cool thing to do in the Black community, because a lot of times what we identify with is that if God and I can't do it, nobody else can. So to be humble enough to understand the resources that are available in that day and age that knowledge would increase, I would have to be wise enough to take advantage of the knowledge that has increased, and to be humble enough to understand, even as a minister, that I'm broken and I'm fragile and that I'm moving to another state because I'm doing the work that is a God-given talent. And someone asked me last week when I was speaking on a platform, what was my original faith space? And I told them that it was my spirit that God had called me to. And they asked me in this day, which is ironic that this is what's happening today, what would my faith say? And I would say that my faith has called me to wisdom. And so I sit in the wisdom seat at this point in my life.
Brenda, beyond responsive on so many different levels, including the description of your experience,
Yes.
Barry, and the power of as soon as one mom sees another one,
Yeah.
Which leads me back to Fadel, that just that basic understanding of someone who has been on the journey. And I heard you give a talk a few months ago where you had this wonderful description of mindfulness and the benefit as attention stability and then emotion regulation. And so if you could talk a little bit about your hypothesis, understanding that the data are preliminary, your hypothesis underneath these results. Why do you think this approach yields the benefit that it does in the way that you have seen so far?
Thank you, David. And thank you, Brenda, for that description too. It really helps put things into perspective. Numbers don't mean much without the qualitative testimonials of what actually transpired in each individual. So having your perspectives are invaluable. And thanks, David. It's good to know that you're that one person that watched that talk. We have been seeing some pretty dramatic effects in the brain and in the body that correspond remarkably with the principles of mindfulness. And so to speak directly to your point, David, developing and training the mind is no different than training a bicep. And we have this, this misnomer within our society that those are two separate things, mind, body. They're really the same, and they inform each other. They're as symbiotic as they can be. When an individual, and this is what our work is showing, is that when an individual stabilizes their attention to the present moment, as it is represented or symbolized by the breath, the individual trains their attention to stabilize on an autonomic and changing stimulus, like the breath. And that is doing this with a bicep, doing your curls. But that's not all. What that does is, as John and Brenda says, it elicits the experience of mindlessness. Oh my goodness, I can't do this. My mind is so busy. My mind is everywhere, this and that, all over the place. That awareness, that insight is critical for change. Without that awareness, you're not aware of how busy your mind is. And all the things that you keep pushing the context of trauma, keep pushing down, pushing down. Because it's a double-edged sword in one way. You push it down, but at the same time, the survivor doesn't want to forget. It's this dichotomy. I don't want to forget the pain. I want to be with the pain, but at the same time, the pain is killing me literally. So mindfulness is particularly efficacious at targeting this because there's the attentional stability that then will allow the individual to watch arising thoughts and feelings, emotions as mere bubbles. And then you can look at it, let it go without judging yourself or the experience and coming back. And you do it over and over and over and over and over again. And the individual shifts from sustaining ability on the breath, attention, to the ability to regulate emotions by starting over and over. The state of meditation starts to develop into more of a trait. It becomes your disposition, just like the major depressed individual, the suicidal individual. The more and more you're in those suicidal thoughts, the more the biology changes to facilitate greater depression. It goes the other way too. And then the final piece that starts to transition with more training, and this is what our data are showing, because we were able, and I didn't present this, to look at what was happening across time. And this is what's really novel about this project, is we're going to measure people from time 0 until time, it's going to outlive me, this project. That's my hope. What happens then is compassion, loving kindness for self and for others, because we realize that these feelings and these emotions are mere interpretations and judgments. They're not the reality. The pain for the loved one is a reality, but the brain is telling us that we can watch sensations without attaching my relationship of self to that feeling, to that emotion. So we release the judgment. When that happens, we start to realize that all beings are like myself, that the stranger on the street I love just as much as my mother. And that's where forgiveness starts to come up and grief starts to go down, because we start to appreciate the capacity of what it means to be without all the, if you will, the contaminants that can dramatically influence our body in a negative fashion. Because the more and more we ruminate and stress and these negative thoughts continue to arise, there is a consequence physiologically within the context of the body that then leads to poor health and morbidity. So combining testimonials like Brenda's in conjunction with, well, we use hard-nosed objective brain imaging, physiological, psychological metrics, combining all those things to then tease apart what's working, what isn't, so that we can continue to refine the program. John created this 52 years ago, MBSR. And so we can use these data to refine it so that Brenda can take that information she learned and apply it when the next person says, I keep closing my eyes and seeing my son. Brenda can say, I know. This is how we can work on this. So we got a lot of work to do, Dave. Got a lot of work to do. And luckily, I'm so grateful that we had the buy-in from our survivors, and that we do see some pretty overwhelming evidence that something good is happening.
Well, the potential here of, unfortunately, created by the pandemic of gun violence in the United States, the potential to create this network informed by science, and nourished in some ways by the mutual relationship that moms and dads and family members have when that happens, is extraordinary and powerful. And so thank you again. John, Fadel just mentioned that, you know, you have the benefit of going back to the beginning, and you have seen the evolution and the growth and the development. And now here we are. We are at this moment, based on what you have heard, both from Fadel and from Brenda, with the benefit of that experience and being there at the beginning. Where do we go from here? What can we learn from this moment to inform where both the research goes and the healing goes here in the United States?
In some way, this has been my hope from the very beginning, even before I sort of came up with MBSR as a kind of way to bring the Dharma into the mainstream of the world. The Dharma being a universal lawfulness expressed in every tradition. So it's not, you know, sort of exclusively Buddhist by any stretch of the imagination, is universal. And Brenda said something just that struck me very deeply when you said to magnify that pause. Yes. So what we can magnify that pause to become life itself. That pause can be one moment, it could be an in-breath or an out-breath, but it could also become, as Fadel was suggesting, your default mode, that and your intention to actually stay in the body in that kind of a way that doesn't deny the pain at all, but is just infinitely bigger than the pain. So a real healing and a real carrying of the pain can happen while the suffering attenuates. This is wisdom, and you nailed that too. You named that in such a beautiful way. This is, after all, wisdom 2.0 is holding this space for us. And so I think the implications are really boundless. We have not yet discovered what the full potential of human beings are. And we need to actually engage in this love affair of sanity and well-being and exploration. And as I said earlier, intentionally, mindfully, whatever energy it takes to do it, including changing our laws, create structures that minimize harm. I mean, we have gun laws that actually maximize harm. We have voter suppression laws that are maximizing harm, and we're seeing them sprout up by the hundreds since just the, January. And so there's a certain kind of commitment to flowering, to flourishing, a kind of that mindfulness is actually a love affair with what's deepest and best in ourselves. And Brenda, when you and all the other people who are engaged in this kind of work go out into the world, it's profoundly inspiring because you are it. It's not like something you're selling or talking about. And that wakes people up. And that's most what we need, is to actually, as you said, extending the pause so that it becomes like, this is who I am. The full catastrophe of the human condition, embraced and carried with a degree of sort of dignity and wisdom and togetherness. So it's not all about me and my suffering or my pain, but a we and the world we need to create, because there's so many forces that are actually behind why there's so much gun violence in this country. I mean, I have a graph that I printed out from the New York Times. I don't know if it will be visible, but it just shows you the number of guns in the United States versus about 6 or 7 countries in Western Europe. And, you know, the United States is up at the upper right-hand corner and everybody else is down the lower left-hand corner. This does not have to be. You mentioned the UK and we have you know, the difference in gun violence. So this has something to do with our misunderstanding of what the American psyche is. And when we identify ourselves as so frightened that we need a gun to defend ourselves in civil society, that's a diagnostic that needs to be attended to in a medical way, in a way that actually asks, what is the deep source of suffering, of dis-ease here? And how can we treat it, whether it's at the level of individuals or MBSR training, or at the level of society or cities or the country, in ways that actually recognize everybody's humanity and engage in us all, in some sense, waking up to the ways in which we're blind, and all of us do a certain kind of othering that we are very, very reluctant to admit.
Mm.
And when we can get beyond that othering, then we'll see, like, there is a way to speak to human beings who are very different from ourselves that might, and I hope it does, because the fate of the world hangs in the balance, and certainly the fate of our democracy and civil society, to, you know, recognize what we have in common. So we have, it's a big agenda, let's say, and the science is incredibly important, because in this era where, you know, just people believe whatever they want as fact, we really need to sort of wake up to the fact that the science is a kind of secret superpower. It doesn't say everything that is truthful, because often it's weighing evidence that can point in a lot of different directions. But when the preponderance of the evidence is in a particular direction, then you take the shot in the arm, or then you subscribe to a mindfulness-based intervention to actually come to some degree of healing and a trajectory of actual transformation coming out of that healing. And I just feel incredibly humbled to be in this conversation with you folks. I mean, just really, and also uplifted, because this is, and it better be, the wave of the future to a very, very strong extent. And it has to help us all extend that pause while we have a chance.
So powerful. John, thank you for all you have done and continue to do. Fadel, thank you for all you have done and continue to do, and your commitment to this. And finally, Brenda, I can speak for myself, for your fellow panelists, and for everyone watching. So grateful for your leadership, your example, your courage, your love, your engagement with all of us. It's something that I will carry with me and remember, and out of respect for you and for Kenneth, let me just, in the final minute that we have, allow you the space to close out this panel discussion. Brenda?
Thank you so much. I just, I'm listening to everything, and I think that John Kabat-Zinn said it, it's inconceivably painful. And every day I miss Kenneth. But one thing I admonish and I challenge people, do not put a period behind my son's name, because my son is still talking, because his mom is still evolving and she's still moving in this space. And I want to be a part of the change that I want to see. I was locked in my mind. I'm free. Mindfulness helped teach me that. And I know how to stay free now. I have the tools, I have the resources. This is my passion. I don't want another mother to have to go through what I went through. And it's real. It's real. The pain is real. The loss is real. But what we do together, and I often say in speaking engagements that I go on, not one of us can do what all of us can do together. The crime wasn't on Kenneth or I. The crime was on humanity. We speak to humanity. Thank you so much for this opportunity as well.
Thank you.
So I'm guessing I'm not alone in some of the tears that I'm shedding with all of you. So just taking a moment, putting your hand on your heart with me. I think John said it beautifully. This conversation humbles us and uplifts us. And thank you all for being with us and for sharing. There'll now be a break on the main stage, and breakouts will be happening for the next 45 minutes. Please check your attendee access page to see what you may want to join. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you back here on the main stage at 2 p.m. with Tarana Burke. And just a reminder that we know there's many of you longing for more connection. So today we did add additional sessions just to hang out and connect. If you prefer to be in connection with other attendees, you can just go to the meetup room at noon and at 4 p.m. Enjoy your breakouts or your break, and we'll see you back here soon. We love you.